Hi again, everybody. This is Erin Edlund from Morningside College. Thank you so much for being here. Our students from the Bud Day Center for Civic Engagement and Dr. Valerie Hennings are going to be leading our discussion tonight. We're going to wait about 2 more minutes just because we do have quite a few people joining. So we are going to have you unmute, and you're welcome to unmute yourself. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat. And the students are monitoring that, so they are happy to answer your questions as well. We will be getting started in just a couple minutes. Hi again, everyone. This is Erin Edlund from Morningside College. We are about ready to get started here. It looks like we've got a nice group on. So thank you again for being here. I am so pleased to present Dr. Valerie Hennings and her group of students from the Bud Day Center for Civic Engagement. They are going to be leading tonight's discussion, and I am going to let them take it from here. Just a few housekeeping notes. Feel free to use the chat function. The students will be monitoring that and can answer your questions throughout. You're also welcome to unmute yourself from time to time if you have a question that you want to ask directly. But I am going to let our students take it away.
Actually, I'm going to get started. Good evening. My name is Dr. Valerie Hennings, as Erin said, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our very first Morningside MasterClass. I am an associate professor of political science here at Morningside, and I'm also the director of our Colonel Bud Day Center for Civic Engagement. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Day Center, it was founded in 2015, and the purpose of the Day Center is to support as well as enhance the activities of citizenship and civic awareness of our students as well as the Siouxland community. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the power of civic engagement. And given that we are all gathered here on the eve of Election Day, I don't think we can stop ourselves from talking about the election. So that's certainly a part of our agenda as well. We're also going to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, as well as the work of the Day Center, and that is civil discourse, and thinking about how do we talk about politics, sometimes very difficult conversations with folks who disagree with us. So those are some of the things that are on our minds as we sit here this evening. Before we jump in, I do want to introduce you to 4 of the Day Center Fellows who are working with the center this year, and they've been working for multiple years now. And we're just going to do a quick roundabout, and they're going to say hello themselves.
Hi, I'm Garrett Arbuckle. I am a sophomore here at Morningside. I'm studying political science with a minor in legal studies, and I am from Littleton, Colorado.
Hi, I'm Sam Peterson. I'm a junior here at Morningside. I'm a political science and business double major with a minor in legal studies, and I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Hi, my name is Kaylin Minker, and I am a political science major with minors in psychology and business. And I am from Mobile, Iowa, and I'm a senior. I don't know if I said that.
Hi, I'm Macy Moore. I'm a senior, and I'm a biology and political science major with minors in chemistry, psychology, and sustainability studies. And I'm from right outside Omaha, Nebraska.
So, as Erin mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to let us know in the chat. We do have a couple things we want to start our conversation off in terms of a couple topics, but then ultimately our goal is to make sure that we have an opportunity as a full group, everyone who's joined us here this evening, to talk a little bit about civic engagement. So I'm going to pass things over to Macy Moore. She's going to get us started.
Yeah. So I'm just going to start us off with a little bit of a broad look at civic engagement. So obviously, this masterclass is called The Power of Civic Engagement, but that concept can kind of mean a lot of different things and can be defined in a number of ways. At its core, civic engagement describes how an active citizen can impact the future conditions of their community, which is still a pretty broad definition. But we can break this down in a couple different more ways. And one way we can do that is by separating it into informal versus formal forms of civic action. So that informal is more of a private action. So maybe that's helping a neighbor mow their lawn or individually volunteering. Whereas a formal active civic engagement might look like running for public office. So it's something that's a little bit more public. So informal versus formal is one way we can break down civic engagement, but perhaps like the more common way we could break this down would be into the 4 constructs of civic engagement, which are social cohesion, civic commitment or duty, civic skills, and civic action. So before I kind of talk about how they all interact with each other, I can just briefly define some of them. So social cohesion really focuses on the relationship strength and the sense of solidarity between a community. Civic commitment or duty is being willing to make positive contributions to society. Civic skills refers to the ability to be involved in a civic society and fulfill one's civic duties. So this might look like knowing the political system or having the communication skills to have a discussion like we're all having today. And then civic action, which is participating in those activities to better one's community, so volunteering or voting. And as you can kind of see already just by the definitions, these 4 constructs kind of interact with one another and they're very cyclic. So the civic action of participating rolls into social cohesion. You need to have that action before you can build that relationships and those strengths. But every construct kind of works within itself. Now that we kind of have a basic definition, why is civic engagement important and why are we talking about it today? Perhaps the most important part is for community building. And as you've noticed in most of the definitions I gave, community was a word that was brought up many times. Civic engagement can strengthen the community as a whole, as well as the individuals within it. And it can do this by building those relationships like we talked about in social cohesion, creating a sense of belonging and increasing knowledge and representation of the citizens within the community. There's a couple tangible examples of this at work. So a recent study from CIRCLE, which is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, they found that increased levels of civic engagement within a community fostered better resilience in times of economic downturns and even led to lower unemployment rates. So participating in various forms of civic engagement can really have valuable benefits to a community and the individuals within it. In addition to community building, equity and democracy also thrive off of the various forms of civic engagement. So one major source of inequity is underrepresentation, particularly among non-white, low-income, and immigrant communities or individuals. So through civic engagement, whatever form it may take, voices can be brought to the table, and that cycle of disengagement between community or political leaders and the citizens that they serve and represent, we can kind of end that cycle and bring some more voices to the table. At Morningside, civic engagement can look very, very different. One way that we experience and we try and utilize engagement on campus is through volunteering. So on an individual level, many of our students are involved throughout the community, but more on a larger scale, most of our organizations on campus, athletic teams, and our honor societies really try and weave in reaching out into the community and volunteering into what they do every day and into their mission statements. So for example, our soccer team, they often go out and do trash cleanup around campus. Into the Streets is another event that ODK, our honor society, puts on. Typically we have over 500 students go out and volunteer in the community on that day. So volunteering is one way we do it. We also have some service learning opportunities, mainly focused within the classroom. So at Morningside, we do have an experiential learning requirement, and one way students can fulfill that requirement would be through a service inclusion. So maybe that's spending 10 hours volunteering. In one of the classes I'm in right now, there's a service learning component, so I'm working on a recycling campaign for campus and the civilian community. So that experiential learning requirement is one option, as well as the AmeriCorps program. So Morningside is a member of the Campus Compact, Iowa Campus Compact, which is an AmeriCorps program. And a couple of us here have been involved in that program for getting some service hours while also learning how to better help our community and learning some of those skills that can better our community as a whole. So one form of civic engagement that we haven't really talked about yet, and it's definitely on all of our minds the night before an election, and it's especially salient in this time, is political engagement. So like all forms of political engagement, it can be further divided into a number of categories. So discussing politics, voting, advocating for policy, or even running for office. So I'm going to toss it off to Garrett. He's going to talk to us a little bit more about political civic engagement and what that looks like at Morningside.
And one thing, we do have a question in the chat. Perhaps, Garrett, you could also talk a little bit about how our current COVID context is affecting everything. So I know that was something that you wanted to share, but it looks like we've got Barbara who's interested in learning more.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the political act of civic engagement that Macy outlined a little bit for us, and more specifically what that looks like for college students and what it looks like on a college campus. So political engagement, as Macy highlighted, can go from running for office. More forms that college students usually get involved with this political action is through working for campaigns or working for phone banks or getting involved in groups like Next Gen Iowa or Campus Election Engagement Project and different organizations that allow for voter registration, voter education, and then getting out the vote efforts, just to kind of compile all of those components together and work to drive and educate the community on the upcoming election that is happening. And alongside of that, with the COVID and how that works on our college campus, how we've been kind of doing that is we have gone a little bit more social and had online platforms as well. So for anything that we've hosted for, say, our educational component of it, one thing that we did is we hosted watch parties for all of the debates so that all of the students can get a better grip on what the candidates are like, policy stances, so on and so forth that way. And we had Zoom options for everyone to join in that way, and they could still be engaged and do all of that, communicating with students more broadly online platforms, reaching them where they're already at, and doing less tabling events. We moved two of our tabling events for voter registration outside so that we had bigger space to socially distance and had a better location to do that instead of being crammed all together in the cafeteria. So now for college students, why is voting important to college students? Why is civic engagement important to college students? This is going to be the first time a lot of college students are actually going to be able to vote. And so it's good they get that sense of community. And when you acquire that community here on campus and you foster that community of that it's a salient issue to go on and promote, they're more likely to go out and go vote. There's also issues that college students are facing that they're thinking about their lives post-graduation. So whether that be issues like climate change that they're worried about, the economy, what that's going to look like when they're out of college, and just going into that, and so that they're looking at these issues that may be near and dear to their hearts more. And then so it's kind of just also like kind of a coming of age thing that people kind of think. And there's actually, we're going away from the more civic duty aspect of it, that people feel like it's their requirement to be engaged, and it's becoming more of like a coalition, like a life obligation, almost like a community aspect that they're going and making it a part of their everyday lives to go out and be civically engaged. Now, according to a data firm called TargetSmart, 6 million voters under the age of 30 have already cast their early ballots this election, and 2 million early voters cast their ballots at the same time in 2016. So we have seen a dramatic shift in the number of younger voters that are getting engaged. And a lot of that can just be attested to their educational aspect on it. There's the more social aspect. You see celebrities all of the time on social media. Different platforms are now starting to reach voters, and the young voters where they're at. College campuses have a great way of informing people about the election and using their different resources to go on and kind of promote what's going on that way. Morningside is a part of the NSOLVE, which is the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. And that shows our numbers have changed from 2012 to 2014. They went, 2012 to 2016, we saw an increase from 63% to 68%. And then from 2014 to 2018, we got a platinum award for our midterm election turnout. So we've seen that increase as well, just even in the midterm elections, that people are becoming more engaged. And a lot of it, can be attested to that educational aspect that people are getting. When they know about it, the more likely they are to go and be engaged about it. This year, Harvard University produced a poll study that showed that 63% of young voters found that they would definitely vote, compared to 2016, when it said that only 47% of young voters said that they would definitely vote. So just some more statistics to back up that there's this shift to coming, that it's going to be more of a life kind of characteristic that people are moving more towards, rather than it's just a checklist thing that they have to go and become civically engaged. It's going to become more incorporated in their way of life. Now, speaking more specifically to Morningside and our engagements, what we do here, we do the Morningside Poll. We started that in 2018, and that's a statewide student-run poll that gathers issues of what Iowans think in politics. So it gathers policy issues and it gathers some demographics, and so we can compile all of these components together and see really where Iowans are at and what issues Iowans are facing when it comes to elections. And this year, our poll will be fielded in the spring semester. Then we move on to bringing more candidates onto campus. Last year, we had several of the Democratic candidates for the primary. We had Tulsi Gabbard, Julian Castro, Andrew Yang, and some others as well on campus. And this year, due to COVID, we weren't able to have certain candidates on campus, obviously with the social distancing and having outside guests on campus and stuff, that kind of affected those events. Other events that I kind of highlighted earlier were our voter registration events. We've had several voter registration events for National Voter Registration Day, as well as Constitution Day. We had voter registration tabling outside on the M in the middle of campus over the lunch hour, just stopping students, talking to them on their way to classes, from classes, and getting them registered to vote, because you're able to change your registration to your campus residency here. And so that's a unique way that students are able to get involved, is that they're actually able to register with their campus address, and they don't have to mail in their ballot back home, they can vote. And then along with the registering on campus, we actually hosted a satellite voting location here this year, and that was October 14th. We had a satellite voting station in Epley Auditorium in the lobby of Epley. So that was where students were able to go down and actually cast their ballot here on campus, and it was easily accessible to them. We ran what we called the Election Express. It was a golf cart that picked students up from their classes on their way to classes around campus. And we decked out this golf cart with red, white, and blue and the Election Express. And we just drove students around to the poll so that they had that easier of access doing that.
I'm going to totally interrupt you. If
No,
anyone is interested in having pictures from the Election Express, I've got plenty of them. But it was a great creative activity where students kept physical distance. We were outside, but also encouraging folks to get involved. So it was really neat. And it was led by the students here in this room.
And the last thing I'm going to talk about is that over the summer, this past summer, when COVID kind of was in its peak and was going on, we launched the Colonel Bud Day Center for Civic Engagement's Instagram page. So we launched that this summer, and that's just a way to reach students where they're at. A lot of our promotional aspects go out on that, what we're doing on campus, ways for them to get involved, information about their polling locations, about different events that we're hosting, whatever it may be, just as a way to communicate with the students. So with that being said, I'm going to toss it over to Sam.
Thanks, Garrett. As you mentioned, on campus with COVID, things are looking a lot different for us. As you can tell, we're wearing masks. We're trying to keep socially distanced, and classes look a lot different too. But that's also the same like on the national scale as well. And we're seeing a lot more interesting results for the election so far because of how COVID has shaped the United States and how it's kind of shaped the course of the year. So far in the election, over 96 million Americans have already voted, which is more than double voted early in the 2016 presidential election. And according to Florida University, that's about 68% of total votes cast in 2016. So America's on track to make record voter participation in its history. And that's also the same with young voters. As Garrett mentioned, younger voters are coming out in full force. Over 23 million Americans have already voted who didn't vote in 2016, me included. And over 7 million of them are first-time voters. So you're really seeing a big change with the youth vote. I've heard it been called like the youth quake that's coming out and kind of coming out in full force. And in Iowa specifically, over 955,000 voters have already voted, sent in absentee ballots as of today, and that's 42% of all registered voters in the state. So you're seeing a lot of people trying to get the vote in early, and they're trying to kind of get ahead of the game because of COVID. And in Iowa too, especially, we just moved into a toss-up state according to 538 and other polls. So it's really interesting to look at the kind of different polls that have come out. And we're all pollsters in this room. We've all worked on the Morningside Poll. We love kind of crunching numbers. And one of the most interesting polls that came out recently was the Des Moines Register poll. And it was the first poll all year that showed Joni Ernst with a lead over Teresa Greenfield that was outside the margin of error. So Ernst led Greenfield 46-42 in that poll. But then also like Emerson College had a poll that had Ernst up, or that had Greenfield up 48% to 44%. So you're seeing a lot of different opinions of Iowans, and it's going to be really interesting come election night and the days after the election to see kind of what happens. And the Wall Street Journal and NBC also put out a poll for president that had Biden at 52% and Trump at 42 points, which was kind of mirrored with 538. Biden was at about 51.7 and Trump was at 43.4. So you're kind of seeing these shifts, and those were nationally too. You're kind of seeing these shifts with kind of elections and kind of seeing how people are responding as we get closer to the election. And those are some of the kind of races around here that we're looking at. We're also doing election night coverage. Tomorrow night, we're trying to get on the Facebook page for Morningside College and the YouTube, but it'll be on our radio. What's the radio?
KMSC Fusion 93.
KMSC Fusion 93. And we're looking at a variety of races, not just the Iowa Senate or the US president. We're looking at the Arizona Senate, for example, between Mark Kelly and Martha McSally, which can kind of decide the fate of Arizona because that was held by John McCain, who passed away earlier this year. And his widow actually endorsed Joe Biden, which could give him a swing in the state. And so we're looking at that. We're also looking at ballot measures such as South Dakota Amendment A, which legalizes recreational marijuana. And in recent polling by Argus Leader from Sioux Falls, 51% supported the amendment and 45% opposed it. So that's going to be another really interesting ballot measure to look at. And it's not only historic levels of voting, we're also seeing historic candidates running. Rutgers University has done a study that shows 583 women are candidates for the US House, which broke the record set 2 years ago by about 22%. So that's 80 more candidates than ran 2 years ago for US House. So we're seeing record numbers of voters and as well as record numbers of people running. And these people are running and they're voting because they care a lot about the issues and care about kind of what's going on. A Gallup poll said that the top issues for people are the economy, national security, and the response to the coronavirus. And the Des Moines Register poll kind of said the same thing. People are more worried about the economy, and they're also very worried about healthcare and about how they approve of President Trump's time in office or not. And these issues can be pretty contentious to talk about, and they can be difficult to have with people of different political views than you. But Kaylin has a few good tips about how to have civil discourse and talk in groups.
All right. So before we begin more of the Q&A portion of the night, like Sam just said, let's talk a little bit about how it is even possible to remain agreeable even when we disagree in political discourse. I think we can all agree that politics seem to be becoming more and more polarized. The gap between political parties seems to keep growing. But I think it's very important for us to recognize that disagreement can be very helpful and is actually important because a variety of perspective allows us to view issues in various ways. And I would even go as far as to say if we can't talk politics with the people around us, we're not best utilizing a true democracy. We must be able to make the best, most informed decisions, which means that we need to talk about a variety of issues in a variety of ways. First of all, the most important thing to remember here is the golden rule in general. Everyone knows it, treat others how you want to be treated. I think that is just something that we need to always keep in mind. But it's also, we need to recognize that talking about differences is hard. A quote from the Des Moines Register said that when having political conversation, character, ethical leadership, and civility have moved from being just nice to have to absolutely necessary. So before we talk about kind of how we want to have these political conversations, I think it's important to understand, why do people get so defensive about politics? A main reason is because politics really have real life consequences for people. For example, if you are a lover of a certain sports team, there's conflict all the time in our day-to-day life. A person might be very upset if their team loses, and they might get into some heated arguments about it. But at the end of the day, there's really no real life consequences. People define themselves by their political identity. So people feel as if they are being personally attacked, and many strong emotions are tied in, which is why we must always stay away from those attacking statements and remain very respectful. We must be respectful of all opinions. It's important to remember to always stay calm. And if you need to step away and take a minute, if you feel yourself getting worked up, then that's totally okay. Recognize that there are no perfect solutions, and there's not often easy solutions to anything. Everyone has different backgrounds and reasons that they believe what they do believe. However, hateful statements having to do with race, gender identity, sexuality, etc., they're never helpful or acceptable, so just stay away from those. And if you are getting into a conversation where hateful language is being used or something like that, it's best just to walk away, because no one is going to win there. Always stay calm, and yeah, you can always point out if a person's saying something harmful or something like that, but it's best just to not even go there in these political discussions. And the goal of political discussion isn't always to change someone's mind. That's something that I think we forget about a lot. And just because you disagree on one topic doesn't mean you're going to disagree on absolutely all topics. And it's important to always be conscious of asking why in order to further a productive conversation, rather than coming in with those but statements followed by another opinion. An article from NPR gave a great example that said, possibly instead of saying, how can you possibly overlook all the evidence on whatever, say climate change, you might ask, what experiences have shaped your thinking on this issue? So just the simple rewording of an accusatory response versus a productive talking. When it comes to media, it's important to use a variety of sources because it's easy to fall into a sort of confirmation bias, which is a tendency for a person to search for and interpret information in a way that confirms their own perceptions already. And I know that the media, there is a lack of consistency by public news sources, and that's a major reason that it's very hard for people to agree on facts. So the best thing to do, again, is just have a variety of news sources and be willing to listen to a variety of opinions. Lastly, it's important just to listen, show respect, and be conscious not to be dismissive or sarcastic. Don't just sit and listen to respond. It's really important to listen, take in what a person's saying, and then form your next statement instead of already just in your head thinking of what you're going to say rather than actually listening. And when you listen in a calm, respectful manner, the person who you're talking to is probably going to subconsciously mirror that. If you start being attacking, they're going to do the same. Another good kind of comment to always make is if a person starts to get a little bit more worked up, you can just kind of give them that, I understand your passion and I appreciate your position, and just thank them for sharing it with you, because obviously, like we said before, politics are something that people get very emotionally tied into. So personally, I am lucky enough to have a safe environment to talk about politics in the classroom, on campus, and I'm really excited that we get that opportunity tonight. And the biggest thing I've learned in talking about politics in general is just to always be respectful, ask lots of questions, and recognize that if a person doesn't want to have a civilized conversation, it's not your job to force them to. You don't have to have conversations with everybody either, but it's always just important to get a variety of views.
Thank you so much. All right, so on that note, we did want to take the time now to hopefully have a really great conversation with you all. We shared with you some of the different ideas that we have as we're thinking about civic engagement broadly here at Morningside, as well as heading into the election the night before. So I want to ask, does anyone have any questions or anything that they would like to raise for the group to discuss? It's that dreaded pause as a professor where I just wait. I ask the question and then I just wait them out to see if anyone's going to say anything. So what? Oh, go ahead.
This is Sally, and I would say that I sometimes, because I think we all know who our conversations are, what our conversations are going to be based on who we're engaging with. So, our perception is this is someone I'm going to struggle with, so I have to think differently. And I often use I statements like, I'm still trying to figure out what's the best answer. And then it makes it look like I've done that with when I work with my interaction with families. So I appreciate all the good suggestions that you're having, because I too think that we still have to have the conversations. We still have to keep talking to each other, because the more we pull away from that, then I think that's where we see it getting a bigger struggle and more polarizing. But I often use I statements and make and have it be that I'm the one struggling, and see how people pull themselves in, and are they more comfortable in that kind of a conversation. Whereas if it's someone that I know is going to be in total agreement with me, I might, be a little bit more assertive in a different way. So.
Mhm. I think that's a really good strategy when we think about using those I statements. Something that I really appreciated, Kayla, that you talked about, that I know sometimes I can forget when I'm outside of my professional world, but having those conversations with friends and family, and as we're thinking about that Thanksgiving dinner where we all sit around, and of course we're going to talk about the election, is remembering that not every single conversation is meant to persuade and to get everyone to agree. Actually, what would be an ideal goal is to be able to disagree and keep talking. That, I think, in many ways is what we're hoping to do and trying to do as we think about how do we interact with others and in these different contexts, as Sally suggested.
Well, and along with that, I think that's why one of the main reasons it's so important to ask, why does the person believe what they believe? What has shaped their view? And once you hear that, then you're much more likely to be able to say, I understand where you're coming from. I respect that. Now it's okay if we both have our separate opinions. I think sometimes getting that background is helpful as well.
And that is a great point. I would say, always remember nobody has had the same life experiences that I've had.
There are a lot of really great questions that are coming up through the chat. And this one is from Chuck, and he has a concern. I don't know if everyone can read it and see it. I hope so. But the question is, those with strong opinions can exhibit compromise skills and listening. How do you bridge that gap between those folks as well as the people that you were just describing, Kaylin, about people who seek out people of like interests or the same interests? So it could be this mix of people with the same opinion as well as folks with compromised skills and listening. How in the world do we bridge that gap? What do you all think? Do you have any ideas?
I can say something to that. So like when you bridge the gap between those, obviously, as kind of Sally was highlighting, you kind of have a feel for those different things. And so when you're trying to do that, it's just a way of knowing that not everything is personal to you. Like it's not necessarily personal attacks on you and your character as an individual or on anything like that about you personally as an individual. It's just more or less like people are experiencing those feelings, and they're feeling strong enough about those opinions to share them with you. And so it's just one of those things where you have to be able to sit there and listen and take those opinions from those other people in, and then you can even voice your opinion and different things like that. But as kind of Kaylin was saying earlier in her talk, it's knowing your kind of how you react is maybe how they're going to react. So when you're bridging that gap, it's going to just go for the way that you're handling yourself with that. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump into that.
Yeah, I can kind of join to that, the first part of the question about seeking out people who have a similar interest to ourselves. Coming from the Midwest, I think most of us don't really love conflict. And so oftentimes we kind of seek out those people to avoid those tough conversations. And like Kaylin mentioned earlier, that confirmation bias can kind of creep in. We tag on to things that are going to support our opinions. So I do think that conversations like this, where maybe you're experiencing a diverse set of views or people you haven't spoken to before, is really healthy. I think there's a number of ways to do that, whether it's engaging with new groups or new people and kind of getting outside that comfort zone, or even seeking out those tough conversations, as hard as they are to have. That's one of the ways that you can kind of normalize having those hard conversations, and it makes things a lot easier in the future.
I know on campus, especially, kind of like Macy mentioned and Garrett, seeking out the hard conversations. I mean, even if you're friends, like, you don't have to surround yourself with people all the time that are, liberal, very conservative. I know with myself, like, I try to surround myself with people who kind of come from different backgrounds and like different political views. So then even if you're walking to your dorm or you're walking to the cafeteria, you can have these 1 or 2 minute conversations. And then that really helps open up like the pathways to more difficult conversations. And I feel like part of it too is trying to have good rapport with like someone else. And if you can have these like personal bonds and really get to know them, then you can have these conversations, even if they are a little compromised listening, or they don't want to kind of take in everything that you say, or even if you don't take in everything they say. Like, I think it's still, if you have personal connections and friendships, it'll go a long way.
And the only thing that I would add to this is, and I think it's underscored in everything that you folks just said, is that this takes practice. This is a skill that we build. So when it comes to seeking out, sometimes those uncomfortable, again, not seeking out harmful situations, but uncomfortable situations, we have to practice this. And we're not going to get it right every time. But if we think and keep a little bit in terms of those tips that Kaylin was talking about before, we can get better. It is a skill that we can improve upon. There is another question along the same line from Charisse that is looking at social media. What is the role of social media when it comes to this civil discord? What do you all think? I'm not going to give my 2 cents yet. Go on, what do you think?
I mean, I think the same rules apply as when you're talking in person. Just because it's being typed over a computer screen does not make it any less real. And I think that that's something that a lot of times is very easy to, it doesn't feel as real. You're not looking eye to eye with the person and saying these things. So I think just, again, keeping in mind to always be respectful, don't jump in and attack. And I mean, again, if you see something and you're consistently seeing maybe someone posting very negative things, then unfriend them. Like, you don't have to see that. That'd be what I would say to that.
Building upon that, one thing to remember is that there are people behind that screen and that account and different things like that. One thing I think that social media does contribute to the polarization of like the stark distinctions and the heated arguments, and it definitely adds fuel to the fire 100%, because as Kaylin mentioned in her section, that there's a lot of that bias that's out there, that confirmation bias. So if you see it and it applies to what you think, then you're more likely going to be able to go and share it. And whether or not that's actual factual information, whether it's a poll that confirms one of your biases, that you have an image that confirms that, whatever it may be, you're more likely to go off and share that. And I think that that's something as users of social media, we have to be very aware of, is that maybe if it does like instantly get hit on one of your points, whether that be, yeah, like I'm feeling happy and I agree with this, or like this post really makes me angry, maybe go fact check it before you go and reshare it or do anything like that. But when you are typing those conversations, it's a lot easier to just say it and type it behind the screen. But you have to realize that there are still people behind those screens.
One more thing, going just a tiny bit further into that with like confirmation bias again, social media is literally shaped to feed us information that we want to hear. So just because your newsfeed is filled with the same opinion does not mean that everyone shares that opinion. It just means that that's what is being targeted at you. So again, I think it's just so important to look at a variety of resources, to really do some of your own research. Don't just rely on social media for your news, even though I know that's easy to do. It is important sometimes to step outside of social media to get news. And I think that's something that a lot of younger people especially fall into, is just seeing things on their news feed, and then that, kind of helps shape what they think. So.
And if I might, there's a line of scholarship that is growing and growing within the field of political science that really taps into a lot of the points you all are talking about. And it's this phenomena of misinformation. What do we do about all that misinformation? How do we handle it? And we have learned that there are certain tactics that tend to work better than others when it comes to handling misinformation. So for example, when you've got that friend on Twitter who is posting and sending out all this information that you suspect is incorrect, one thing that you can do that has been shown to demonstrate people's minds being corrected of this misinformation is that, again, publicly sharing other information with them in that public space. Now, it might be easier to, especially if you know them for real, to pull them aside and say, hey, that document, that brief that you sent out there wasn't accurate. But to keep it within the space of social media, we have learned that correcting misinformation by multiple sources that are deemed experts, but publicly, and keeping it on that platform can have a positive effect on folks realizing that information was incorrect. So there are things, all is not lost. There are ways that we can address those sorts of things. And I know, Macy, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment before we move off of social media and these conversations that can be had, just mainly about equity and representation in social media. So especially now when a lot of things are moving towards online platforms in the age of COVID, I think sometimes we forget that we are missing large chunks of our population in these conversations, whether it be people with low internet access, low socioeconomic status, even older or younger generations that don't have access to some of these platforms. It can be easy to kind of lose their point of view when we aren't seeing it constantly. And some of these traditional conversations aren't taking place in COVID times. So I think it's important that we still keep in mind that there are other populations that aren't being represented in some of these platforms that we're on.
And I think, Macy, that really does build upon another question that Jeremy raised about, what do you all think about the historic economic and income inequality? Could that be a source of significant political discourse? On social media, the point that you just raised, Macy, makes perfect sense. But perhaps more broadly, I think perhaps, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but he's curious as to what do we think should be done to help relieve some of those inequalities that we know exist when we're thinking and talking more broadly about civil discourse. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can kind of start. So building off of our earlier talk about civic engagement, I think representing those voices and maybe minority or underrepresented communities is probably the most important step we can take. And this falls into a variety of different political actions, so like environmental justice, economic justice, and things like that. So having a voice and a seat at the table for community members that maybe have a closer tie and know what's going on within their community is really important, instead of having someone in a big position or a development person come in that maybe doesn't exactly know the challenges that individual citizens are facing. So I think utilizing civic engagement, building platforms that allow people to have those conversations can really bridge that gap between maybe somebody that's of low economic status or somebody that's typically been disengaged from these political conversations.
And I think too, part of that, as Macy said, you want to get people to the table, but I think you need to have the capacity to be able to get people to the table. Because in a lot of these different places, there's struggles that they can have either especially with voting. I'm just going to use voting for an example. Like
Mhm.
voter ID laws nowadays can become pretty restricted to those that don't have access to a driver's license or don't have access to go to like some place to get their ID, either whether it be cost or like transportation or just having the right documents even. So I think a big part of it too is kind of looking at what's preventing them from getting to the table, and then working to allowing them an easier path to the table and allowing them an easier path to get their voice heard.
There's another question from Jesse, who he is curious about how much do you think experiences change one's beliefs? What do y'all think about that one?
I think experiences change people's beliefs significantly. You know, when you have your own set of socialization, you know, political socialization that you grow up with, whether that be from your parents, from the schools that you go to, different things. But when you go out and get more civically engaged or you get more involved, you get to see and you're exposed to a lot of more different points of view. You're exposed to different ways to see things. And it's just a way that it just opens up your mind to pick up different things, learn new things on your way. And you can say, hey, I didn't really actually even know that. And then you're able to add that into kind of like your Rolodex of information in the back of your mind. And then that just adds to you as an individual and as an engaged citizen.
And just to add on to that, I don't want to interrupt you, Keelan, but then do you think there are some experiences that change people's minds more? That's another part of Jesse's question. So what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say, I think personal experiences, I mean, obviously they shape who we are as people. So they shape our opinions, they shape our views, they shape everything. But also kind of going along with what Garrett said, I think that it's so important not only to have your own personal experiences, but to also learn about other people's, because again, we all live different lives. We've all gone through different things. We've all experienced different things or even the same things in different ways, depending on our background. So I think that it can also be useful just to talk to a variety of people and again, just be so careful not to fall into that bias where you just want to hear what you want to hear. It's good to always ask people why they believe the things they believe, because a person probably isn't just gonna believe something for no reason. They will have some sort of shaping that brought them to a certain decision.
I know that we keep mentioning this, but it always goes back to just putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. You don't have to, go out of your way to try to put yourself in an uncomfortable position, excuse me. But, if one comes up, then take advantage of it, learn from it. Learning is probably one of the biggest things that we can do and one of the most important things that we do. And I remember someone saying, you don't stop learning. And just kind of like Garrett mentioned too, you're learning about new information about how other people see things. And then you're just storing that away. So then you can, when you're making other decisions or you're talking to other people, you can be like, oh yeah, I remember so-and-so said he experienced it like something like this when I experienced it like that. And if you don't put yourself in those uncomfortable positions, I think you're just going to kind of be stuck in like your way, and you're just not going to have diverse viewpoints that you should have.
There's a great question from Christy. We've got all sorts of great questions, but I know some folks in the room might not be able to read all the chat comments. So I'm going to read this just because we've talked about this a lot, folks in this room in our classes. But Christy's talking about how they're struggling with who to vote for this year. I'm really leaning towards a third party. However, both sides really feel it's a wasted vote. Any suggestions on what you would say, and what's your thoughts? Is this a wasted vote? Hit it. What do you think?
So first of all, to answer just straightforward, is it a wasted vote? No, it's your vote is your voice. And that's the way that you need to look at that, because we do live in a representative democracy. And while like the parties may speak to the side that it is a wasted vote, because in the states, when they call the election or whatever, it's going to be either a blue state or a red state. And that's how, in terms of the wasted vote, that's how they're looking at it, because you're not contributing to either of those two parties. However, you as an individual have that freedom here in America to go and be able to cast your vote however you would like, whether or not that is for a certain major party candidate or not. So if there is a third party candidate that you are like, yeah, I align with this, and you don't want to maybe feed into the polarization of the two parties or whatever your reasoning may be, that it is your voice and that is the way that you get to interpret that, or however you want to make that happen, that is 100% up to you. And there is a lot of pressure that maybe makes you want to fit into one of these two boxes. However, you don't have to listen to those, and it really ultimately comes down to you.
All right, go on, Kaylin. What do you think?
So personally, I disagree with that. I do think that I hate the word wasted votes. That just sounds really bad, but I mean, a third party president is not going to get elected.
In the United States,
in the United States, we'll say this year even.
Okay.
Yeah, I wish it could be different. I do. But I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect candidate. I think that it is important to look at some of the main issues that you see as important and figure out what candidate aligns with your views the most. If you do choose to vote third party, that's totally okay. That is 100% your right. You can cast your vote however you want, and I definitely respect that. Just personally, I think that your vote would be more effective going towards one of the two main parties in the United States at the current time.
So I just have a bit of a follow-up because I'm curious, because I hear this a lot from students who might not be interested in supporting either the two major party candidates or a third party candidate. So instead they talk about the right not to vote. And I'm curious as to what you all think about that position. And maybe you all have heard this from your peers, but you know, how choosing not to vote is their way of participating politically. Do you hear that? What do you think?
Okay. Just like,
we have to comment because I'm better at speaking than I am.
All right, so let's have Kaylin, you finish your thought, and then Tana, will you join in?
Okay, yes.
Okay, so go ahead, Kaylin.
All right, so before we even talk about you know, if voting, not voting is a political stance, I think it's also important to remember the entire kind of beginning of this conversation, how there are so many different ways to be politically engaged. There are so many forms of civil engagement. And so voting is not the only way. While it is a very important thing to do in our democracy, there are also lots of different ways that you can advocate for your varying beliefs or different things that are important to you. So even if, however you decide to vote, if you decide to vote, I think it's important to remember that the election isn't the end all be all in terms of that.
Tana, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, well, Kaylin said what I was going to say, because I've actually been running into a lot of peers who do feel that way. And at first I did what you guys suggested, is I asked why, like what was their reason, and I got two very different responses with at least two different people, and one was more so they're active in a lot of different other ways that help support their views, and another person just didn't really understand the importance of voting in the presidential like the presidential election versus voting in the local ones. And I felt like both reasons were valid because it was a difficult decision for them. Now they going into what I was saying, they are voting. The second person is voting, just not in the presidential election because they aren't comfortable with that. And they don't feel like one is more important than the other. So I agree with what Kaylin was saying.
I think too that's important point to point out. It's not one big national election, you know, you hear it, but it's like 50 individual state elections, because there's a whole lot more than just the president that's being voted on. You have certain commissions, you have like judicial retentions, and you have committees, you have state legislators that are being voted for. So I think even if you don't agree with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or a third party candidate, there's a lot more to vote for and a lot more at stake for the elections. Well,
there was another comment and question for the group, and this is from Barbara. When I'm in a group with divergent views from mine, my silence may propose I agree with them. What kind of responses would you suggest to maintain one's integrity? That's a fantastic question.
Yeah,
Can
this
we,
is
can we just start with that? That's a great question.
really great question. And I think that a lot of us here, I can only speak for myself, but fall into that same category. You know, when you're in that sort of situation where you're in the minority representation of your views, the thing is to just go silent and just kind of like sit there and listen and think. And I think that that's something that it's more internal. Like if you know yourself as an individual and you know that even though you may not agree and you're staying silent because you know you don't want to feel like you may get like junkyard dogged or like attacked by like this whole group that you're wrong or whatever, and your choice is to just stay silent, I think that like that's absolutely 100% okay, because it's one of those things where it comes down to you. Like your integrity is with you. So if you are making sure that like you're not swaying your views and you're standing firm in what you believe in, you're just not adding or contributing, that's fine as well. But if you're more outspoken individual and you want to kind of disagree, you can just kind of like put that protection barrier up, like that claim of like, yeah, I disagree with you. I'm not saying that your views are wrong or your opinion is wrong or anything, but and then go into explaining what you think. But I think that silence definitely is okay, and of course it comes across a little bit as you're in agreement, but it just comes down to you knowing yourself in response to that.
And actually, there are a couple points that, and Sally, I hope you will forgive me because I'm about ready to put you on the spot. But there's a really great conversation going on with the chat that might be worth taking some time to talk about. Sally has worked with Morningside over a number of years, where she will bring poverty simulations to campus and throughout the Siouxland community, all over the place. And there are some things that she has learned through those events and through that expertise that can help when it comes to reflecting on different perspectives and approaches. And I know that Jeremy had kind of a follow-up to Sally as well when it comes to a part of her work. Sally, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but would you mind speaking a little bit to the group and how that connects to our conversation about civic engagement?
Yeah, I would be glad to.
Sally.
So probably 20 years ago, I was actually teaching classes at Morningside too. One of the things I came across in an event I went to was a poverty simulation that the Extension Service was doing. And in that scenario, we take on the role of a family living in everyday life and all of the issues that we have to face, get my kids to school, my child to childcare, have opportunity to go to work, if I have a job or have access to a job, how to pay my bills, all of those kinds of things. And so the Missouri has developed a system, a kit that we use that kind of explains that system. So about 6 to 8 times a year, I've done it with school districts. And I think one of the things it does, because there have been times when people have made statements that in my head, I go, oh, that really isn't necessarily what's happening, but it's someone's perception. And we all engage in a conversation partially based on our perception of why somebody does. You know, one example was one time somebody said to me, well, I don't know why people can't, you know, McDonald's is always hiring. And so my thought and comment back was, that's true. The thing is, what happens if you are working a minimum wage job? How does that impact your ability to fund and support your family if that's the only opportunity you have? So it allows for an engaged conversation and sometimes the event we have had people get up and walk out and because it's too close to the life they live every day. So it helps us as a group debrief and talk about how that, I do think that has an impact. I also had the pleasure of participating in an immigration simulation that really helped me frame a new approach on what happens to people as they attempt to immigrate to another country. And the country of that simulation was the United States, but it can, some of it happen if I was a person that was going to immigrate to United Kingdom or something. So that's kind of what, and I've done it for school districts. I've done it for community groups. We've done it at Briarcliff and Morningside. At, like I said, at least 6 to 8. I just retired, so I'm not doing it regularly right now. And with COVID, I wouldn't be doing anything in person, but does that kind of answer a little bit? I don't know if there's anybody has any other specifics, but that would be general.
No, I think that was really helpful, Sally. And I know folks in this room have participated in those simulations that you've led on campus. And again, thinking about civic engagement, that is often a time when we, as a campus community, have a chance to practice how to talk about very difficult issues and very difficult topics.
Yep.
So we've got about 1 more minute. So this is the time when everyone starts packing up in my classroom and I give them the evil eye and I say, hold on, don't go yet. But I do want to ask folks here on the panel, our Day Center fellows, as well as folks who are joining us by Zoom, do we have any kind of final thoughts or final questions? Because I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Go ahead, Garrett.
My final thought just on this is that if you haven't been civically engaged in the past, go out, do something new, go volunteer, go do something that kind of gets you more civically engaged, because it does allow for a wider perspective, and it is a great thing and a great experience. People regret things that they don't do, not things that they do. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're living life, and as the election comes up, and the conversations that will follow as well up into the holidays.
And as you all kind of add this, I don't know if you saw from Michelle, she gave us a great kind of final thought to think about. Each of you individually must have one political stance that is important to you. And she's kind of curious about what is the subject of your passion. So as you all are kind of thinking about your final thoughts for the group, maybe you can respond to Michelle as well.
I think with my final thought, it's that, not everyone's going to be happy with the election or when you're talking about politics. Even especially in the election, there's always going to be someone who loses. It's just the nature of it. So I think being able to have these civil conversations, be able to understand where one side comes from, and then also try to make it so the other side can understand you is a really big aspect of that, a really important thing to master. And it takes a while, it's a skill. It'll take a while to kind of be comfortable talking to people from different political stances and people with different ideas than you. I know especially my one issue that I'm big about is the environment, like climate change, just environmental issues. And I know that's a very divisive topic. So just being able to discuss what's happening and discuss different institutions and aspects of that civilly is something that I'm working towards and something that I'm trying to better myself at.
All right. I guess my final thought would be, well, one, I know that not everyone is super active on social media, but if you are, or if you are trying to become more active, please follow the Day Center on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that, because we're all fellows of the Day Center, and the Day Center puts on some really, really cool events that I think have helped me become much more civically engaged. Sort of like tomorrow night, we're going to have the watch, or the, what is it called? The election coverage. We had like the different watch parties during the debates, and all of those are just, again, places where healthy conversation is really promoted. So I'd say just go and take every opportunity you can, like Garrett was saying. Stay engaged, stay informed. I think that's my final thought.
I'll just start by saying thank you to all of you guys for tuning in, especially on the last normal night of the week, possibly.
And a Monday night.
Yes, on a Monday night. Even just like tuning into this and listening and asking questions, you're already steps ahead of so many other people in civic engagement, so thank you. But just my final thought, similar to what you guys have all already said, just the importance of these conversations, even if they are uncomfortable and awkward to have. It is incredibly important, and it's healthy for us to have those conversations, even if they can get awkward at times. As a biology major, most of my conversations are pretty set in stone. We know that there's a right and a wrong, and that's really helpful. So moving to political science, a little bit more challenging to have those conversations, but I think it's important for us to have, and for us to continue to be respectful. On the note of my passion, like Sam, it's the environment and climate change and things like that. So That's what I'm hoping to go into after I graduate, but
All right, I'll throw my 2 cents in. And this is something that I try to tell everyone beyond Morningside, because there is sort of this myth that young folks are apathetic and they don't care about politics and they don't want to be involved and they would rather do everything else. And obviously, I've got a very biased group here in the fact that they're very active. But I get to see that in my classrooms and in the work that I do. And I see that younger folks do want to be involved. I think and I'm going to put myself in this category as an older folks person, we need to remember to keep the door open for the folks that are coming behind us and, have a chair at the table for them. Realize that the way that we are civically engaged and involved might not be the same way that younger folks are. And I think that we need to maintain that respect. When it comes to the reason I go out to vote is because it is my civic duty. Just because perhaps some younger folks don't view it in that same language doesn't mean that they still don't want to participate. So that's kind of one of the myths that I love to go around and tell everyone outside of higher education, because they don't get to see what a campus looks like all the time, and to see how folks like all these Day Center fellows are working really hard to make a difference. So that's kind of my passion point. Really making sure that we keep the doors open for everyone to be civically engaged and involved. So I think because I'm the oldest one at the table, which is horrible, but I think I'm going to be the one that has to wrap this up, right? Do y'all?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, they're like, yes, do it. Okay, so I want to just thank everyone who joined us on Zoom. I know in these times, many of us are Zoom tired, but it has been fantastic to get this kind of support from folks to come and learn more about the really neat work that students like those sitting here at the table are doing. So please stay in contact and thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.